Well, today, a beautifully different unity. We've been asking this question. We started the year, we worked sort of verse by verse through the book of Revelation, the first 3 chapters, and talked about how we are a beautiful presence in the world. But we're also a presence because we are different than the world. And perhaps there is no more marked difference than the way in which we respond to each other. That we are called to be different than our world around us in the way that we relate to each other. So in an increasingly disconnected culture, we are called to stand out and to be beautifully different by the fact that we belong to one another. And in an increasingly polarized culture, we are called to stand out and be beautifully different because we are called to unity. And there's lots of ways in which to approach this topic. I would like to just do it in 3 ways this morning for you to consider. And we'll kind of go from the abstract to the concrete this morning. And I want to ask these questions. Why does the word unity matter so much to followers of Jesus? Where does unity actually occur? And then thirdly, what does unity make possible in this world? So let's start there. Why does this topic matter so much? Well, for one thing, unity matters for followers of Jesus because unity gets the world's attention. We do stand out if we're unified. I can't begin to count the number of leaders, whether they're in the secular community or in the church community, as we went through COVID and all that was, and all that experience was, how many people said, how do Christian people stay together when there are so many things that separate them? People notice if we stay together when we have differences. In fact, it's one of the things that causes non-believers to stand up and pay attention, perhaps more than any other. Jesus put it this way, before he went to the cross, one day he prayed. And usually the words that you pray before you are going to go to die are words that really matter to you. And just a portion of John chapter 17 says this. Jesus says, I've given them, his followers, the glory that you gave me, he's praying to God, that they may be one as we are one. I and them and you and me, he's praying to God, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. So as the world looks upon followers of Jesus and sees them getting along, being in loving community, the world will recognize, Jesus says, that something special is going on with these people. That the credibility of our witness is tied to our oneness. Okay, so the world notices this. On the other hand, and we have lots of examples of this, the world also, when it witnesses our disunity, we lose our credibility to the world around us. I remember years ago, guy, I think his name was Cecil Hook was his name. He wrote a book and he listed all of the reasons that Christians have separated and divided. And it took several pages. He had over 250 issues that we had divided over as a church. And the world notices that. But when the world sees unity, it desperately desires what we have. So for one thing, the world notices. It gets the world's attention if we're unified as Christian people. The other thing, though, is that unity, beautifully different unity, also gets the evil one's attention. I don't know if you've thought about this, but whenever God's people gather in unity, or basically whenever any people are gathered in unity, Satan seems to take notice. Right from the Garden of Eden, the evil one is known as the divider. And so he divides Adam and Eve from God, and then divides Adam's family from each other. And so you could put it this way, that sin is anything that separates us or causes differences distance between us and God. And Satan has been the divider ever since the beginning. It's kind of his M.O. It's his stock and trade. He's very good at bringing disunity. This is one of the reasons why unity is so difficult to maintain. So if you're in a marriage, it's difficult to stay unified. If your family is breaking apart, it's difficult to stay unified. The enemy is working overtime to bring division and keep us divided. And so it's not just that there's something wrong with the person that you're at odds with, or there's something wrong with you. There are actually spiritual reasons the evil one is trying to separate people. Many of you have felt this. One of the great things that you can do in your marriage is realize that the enemy is not your spouse. That there are other forces at work, bringing you, dragging you apart. And the evil one has always been that way. This is why something like unity, this kind of topic, is like so easy to talk about and sort of clap your hands to in the abstract, right? But it's very difficult to live it, even though it's not hard to cheer for it. Or as the old saying used to go, to dwell above with saints we love, oh, that will be glory. To dwell below with the saints we know, that's a different story. Commands the world's attention, the evil one's attention, but more importantly, it actually gets God's attention. I don't know if you've thought about this. One of the Psalms that would be the Psalms that the Israelite people would sing, a song of ascent that they would sing on the way to Jerusalem for their festivals throughout the year, is Psalm 133. And it goes like this, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. And then it gives this picture of abundance and this picture of overflowing. It's like the precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe, just immersing him. It's as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For there the Lord, and this is interesting to me, bestows his blessing, even life evermore. Well, what does that mean? Other translations would put it this way, where the Lord finds unity, the Lord commands his blessing. It's a very strong word. It's actually like he insists his blessing. He pours out his blessing. He makes sure that his blessing happens where there is unity. Now, most of the time, we plead to God to bless us. We've even prayed that this morning. Bless my finances, Lord. Bless my job. Bless my relationships. Bless my kid. Bless my church. Bless my health. Bless me. Just bless me. But here is a case where God actively pursues, looks for, and then aggressively commands his blessing. There is a place of commanded blessing. And that is where there's unity among his children. And so if you want to live in the blessing zone of God's favor, his blessing showered upon you, without you even having to ask for it. Do you want to live a blessed life? Yes, you do. Yes, you do, right? Yes? Yes, you want to live a blessed life. I do. Then this is how God's blessing comes. Practice unity. Promote unity. Live in unity. That's where God commands his blessing. It's deeply critical to a blessed life. You know that this is true. That your life does not feel blessed if you have broken relationships. You could have all the stuff in the world. You could have all the experiences in the world. But if you have broken relationships, it doesn't feel right. But when your relationships are right, life is right. Isn't that true? There's a place of commanded blessing. And why would God bless unity among his people? Well, for one thing, that's kind of been his dream. That's Jesus' prayer. His vision for human race is that they're created in his own image, and God himself is one. We talk about the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit as being one. Oneness is a mark of God. Humans, we don't naturally come together like that. But when we do, that's what God longs for. But more than that, God longs for it so much that it was actually the thing that he went to achieve when he went to the cross. Now, God sent Jesus to die for us, so our debt of sin could be paid, we could be declared right with God, but also so that we could be in relationship with other people. differently. This is perhaps one of the most powerful passages on the meaning of the cross. It says this, "For Christ himself has brought peace to us." This is Ephesians chapter 2. "He united Jews and Gentiles into one people, when in his own body on the cross, he broke down the wall of hostility that separated us. He did this by ending the system of law with its commandments and regulations. He made peace between Jews and Gentiles by creating in himself one new people, one new humanity from the two groups that hated each other. Together as one body, Christ reconciled both groups to God by means of his death on the cross, and a hostility towards each other was put to death." There's a lot there. The idea is this, that Jesus died to destroy the wall of hostility between people. Now, he's writing into a situation where Jews and Gentiles for generations have hated each other and built oftentimes their identity on not loving each other and being distant from the other. And Paul says that Jesus died so that the wall between those groups could be destroyed, that the unity of the church was purchased at the price of the blood of Jesus. Some people would say this, that historians in particular, I was reading one historian this week who said that one of the evidences that there is a God and that Jesus was raised from the dead and that the Holy Spirit is alive, one of the evidences is not just historical, it's the fact that Jews and Gentiles got together in one group and joined together for a single purpose. It's actually an astounding part of history, that the unity of the Jews and Gentiles is one of the great evidences of who Jesus was. And so, if you violate the unity of the church, then you actually kind of trample on the oneness that Jesus died to bring. And so, in a sense, you're saying the cross of Jesus was in vain, and you're putting up a wall that Jesus died to take down. So this matters to God. It matters to God. It matters because it draws the attention of those outside the faith. It matters because it draws the evil one's attention. It matters because it draws God's attention. So that's the biggest zoomed out picture. Let me zoom in a little bit more. How do we, and more precisely, where do we go to find unity that is beautifully different in our world? There are lots of voices in our world that would suggest that, we just need to be more educated about other people, and then we'll be unified with them. Or they would suggest, well, maybe we just need to change organizational structures, and then we will be brought together with other people. But for followers of Jesus, there's a different reason, a different place in which unity occurs, because it's far deeper than just education or organizational restructuring. And that's because where unity actually happens, I'll put it in my language, where it actually occurs, is what I call the room of grace. Now, let me try to make this clear. You can divide the human race into two categories. Let's start there. God and not God. Okay, is that basic enough? We have God and we have not God. And everybody gets to decide, are you going to be the God of your life? Are you going to sit on the throne, your ego, your way, your decisions, everything? Or are you going to humble yourself and say there is a God? Okay, it kind of divides humanity. Are you going to be willing to say there is a God and it's not me? Okay, in fact, let's try this because I want us to work together here, to step into the room of grace. Okay, if we're ever going to have unity, we need to step into the room of grace, and it starts very simply. Just turn to someone next to you and say, there is a God and it's not you. Go ahead. You don't have to tell them why it's not them, but just go ahead and tell them that. And then turn to the person that just said that to you and remind them they might need it too. There is a God and it's not you, okay? That's the start. That's walking up to the door of grace, okay? It's just the acceptance of reality. The way that you enter into the room of grace, to be unified with people that are different than you, people who have a different lifestyle, different thinking, different values, different ideas. The way that you actually begin to open the doorknob and step into the room of grace is what I call becoming a Me Too church. Now, the Me Too movement sort of took off a few years ago. I don't necessarily mean like that, but I want to borrow the idea. What I mean is this. Sometimes church can become kind of surfacey where you say, how are you doing? Well, I'm fine. Well, me too, right? Life is great. Job is under control. Kids are overachieving. Summertime living is easy. Fish are jumping. Cobs are high. Daddy's rich. Mama's good looking. Everything's fine, right? Everything's good. And at the end of it, you say, oh, me too. That's the way life is. But the room of grace is different. The room of grace means that we begin with the truth that we both need God because neither one of us is God. And so sometimes I think we forget how much we need grace. And so let's just do, if you would, I'll go first. And all you have to say at the end, if any of these statements ring true for you, you just say, me too. Okay? Now, the truth is, I'm a mess if I'm left to my own devices. Well, you can wait till I'm done, but that's a good start. You're with me so far. My ego takes over, and life gets unmanageable, and I need God. And if I'm left to myself, I will waste the only life that I've been given. Yeah. I'll damage my relationships. I'll make a mess of my sexuality. I'll use words that hurt people instead of help people. I'll serve myself instead of others. I'll only pay attention to people who are like me and that I like. Greed will rule my wallet. I'll get resentment as part of the way that I operate. And pride will guide my decisions. And I will worry about tomorrow, and I will be haunted by yesterday if I'm left to myself. And I'll polish the outside and try to pretend that I'm not a sinner. And I'm a mess, and I need God. And all God's people said, welcome to the room of grace. You and I are people who need grace for every breath that we take. And that's where unity begins. And the gospel reminds us of this, that we need grace. And people who are aware of their need for grace, as soon as you grasp that, it will profoundly affect how you treat other people. And God will continue, I believe, as you follow him, to invite you into this room of grace. I'll give you one example, quick invitation that he gave me the other day. Something tragic happened in my son Jesse's school. A boy that he went to school with was stabbed and killed in Forest Lawn last week. And as we got the news of this, I was very disturbing, and I was ticked off. I was sad. I was angry. I didn't know what to do with this. I thought, this isn't right. This could have been my son. I started to pray. I prayed for the kids' parents, particularly. All I could think about was what this kid, the impact of this would have, and the impact it would have on other kids. And then, just like an invitation to come into a different room, as much as he speaks to me, I heard God say, well, what about the kid who did the stabbing? And my first thoughts were, I pray that he gets reformed. I pray that he goes to jail. I pray that... And then, like the opening of a door, I just had this sense, Steve, haven't there been times when if you had a knife available, you'd have done the same thing? Oof. just started to pray for this kid. Completely changed the way that I viewed him. Friends, do you see the things that we judge other people for? We have that acorn inside of us, and if it had been watered and the circumstances had been different, everywhere we go is grace. And so, how does unity begin? My desperate need for grace forces me to not look down on you, because I need grace too much to do that. You can tell people who are very aware of grace because they don't have that sense of judgment when other people fail. Just talk about someone else's failing and watch how the group responds. The people who respond that have been to the room of grace, they don't judge. They don't judge. The more we're aware of grace, the more we enter that room, the more we're set free from judging and from questioning motives. And so we remember that every one of us would suffocate if it wasn't for the gift of air that grace brings into our lives. How do we stay unified as a church? Come to the room of grace. That's where unity occurs. The second place that it occurs is not just in the room of grace, but also in the shadow of the cross. The brightest and most beautiful place in the world is in the shadow of the cross. Let me explain what I mean, and one thing that you will see. When I stand in the shadow of the cross, what I see is that every single person around me matters so much to God that he would send his only son to die for them. Every person. In the shadow of the cross, what I see is Jesus Christ dying for the world, for each single person in the world. Which means that every person that I look into their eyes, that I have any kind of interaction with, is somebody that is so precious to God that they are worth the price of God sending Jesus to die for their sins. How do you treat somebody who is worth that much to God? Very carefully, with honor. What if we were a people in the shadow of the cross who looked at other people and saw how valuable they were, not to society, not to us personally, but to God himself? That would dramatically change the way that we viewed every single encounter with other human beings. But it's very difficult, because most of the time, what I do is I treat you based upon how much you are worth to me, right? Like if you're worth a lot to me, if you're worth something to my reputation, if there's something that you can give me, if there's something that you make me feel good, if there's something that you can move me forward in life, then I'm going to treat you very carefully. But what if I treated you not based on what you were worth to me or you could give me, but based upon what you are worth to God? And we already know how much you are worth to God. The cross. What if we could remember that? I think Jesus understood this, even while he was on the cross or going to it. I was thinking of Jesus the other day. On the cross, praying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I always thought that, I like the idea of forgiveness, but I thought this is ridiculous. They're actually pounding the nails into his hands. How could he possibly say, Father, forgive them? How could he possibly forgive them in that moment? It was because he was ascribing their worth from what they were worth to God at that moment. And that enabled him to forgive his enemies. How do you forgive your enemies? Well, Jesus could forgive their enemies because they weren't, first of all, his enemies. They were, first of all, someone for which he was giving his life because God loved that person so much. This is the first step to forgiveness. If you're here and you have someone that has hurt you, which I guess would sum up all of us, and the wall between you is high. It's growing. And you're angry. And you're bitter. And frankly, if you told me your story, I would probably say you have every right to be angry at that person. And you have these imaginary conversations. I don't know if anyone else has this. Angry conversations where the person that I'm angry at says something, and I say something brilliant that completely exposes them for being the jerk that they are, and everybody cheers me on. It's an anger fantasy. Maybe that's you today. And I want to suggest to you, how do you get to a place of unity? You come to the shadow of the cross, and you begin to see. This is the first step of forgiveness, friends, is that you begin to see people, not first of all as the one who hurt you, but first of all as the one that Jesus came to die for. And then I use my imagination, and I wonder if we could take the few hundred people that we have today and those who are watching online. What if for one single day we just treated everybody that we interact with based on how much they are worth to God rather than how much they are worth to me? Every interaction. Tim Hortons person who gives you the coffee and the muffin. The grocery line person who was far too slow. The person that you interact with this afternoon around the table, or you go to school with, or your teacher, or your students, or your former boss, or your spouse, or your sister, or your brother, or your aunt, or your uncle, or your grandparents, or your ex. What if you just first of all said, wow, I've been to church, I saw that cross. Wow, I'm in the presence of somebody that Jesus loved so much that he came to die and give his life for. Wouldn't that reframe our interactions? Wouldn't that change the way we see people? I'm not saying that we curl over and that we never have confrontation and all of those things, but what if the cross reframed our posture before we even start the conversation? And now that I look at you, and some of you have told this before, and I see that cross over your head, and even though you've been such a jerk and you've caused me so much pain, I see what you're worth to God, and when I can envision that, a shift begins to happen. And it's beautiful. And I can treat you as someone that is worth the cost of Jesus. And then we start to talk. Well, I think that's where unity occurs. Unity matters. Unity happens in the space of grace, in the shadow of the cross. But let me get a little bit more in your face or practical and say, okay, what does it make possible? I think as followers of Jesus, we have something that this world does not understand and does not have. And that is the space for grace, and that is the message of the cross. And the result is that we can move towards people who are very different than us. Well, for one thing, if you're a Christian, let's start there. Let's say you're a Christian and you meet another Christian. And by that I mean someone who believes in Jesus, the death, burial, the resurrection of Jesus. You meet another Christian, but they're very, very different than you. They do strange things, like they like country music. They cheer for the Oilers. I don't know. Like they do things that are just hard for you to take. Unity reminds us, never forget this, that what binds us together, if we're followers of Jesus, is much larger and more valuable and weightier and lasts longer than anything that separates us, if we have Jesus in common. So many people forget this. I don't know how many theological arguments I've been in, far too many. In fact, these days I think you'd have a hard time getting me into a theological argument because I've been there and there's no good results that seem to come. But what I know is this: if someone follows Jesus, let me put it another way. I have more in common with a 99-year-old black woman in a hut this morning in Malawi who has found the grace of Jesus than I do with someone who looks exactly like me, who is a middle-aged man, who is white, with 4 kids living in Calgary, who doesn't know the grace of Jesus. But because I know the grace of Jesus, and I know that someone else knows that, I can move towards them even if they are different than me. This is so hard, friends. This takes a lot of maturity because we tend to cluster. We can move towards people who are different than us with our time, with our energy, because of unity. Secondly, unity will also not just make us move towards people that are different and that we might not initially feel attracted to, but we can also move towards vulnerability. Because what brings us together is not politics, it's not even ethics, we're the people who are willing to say we're not fine and be fine with that. It's okay to not be okay. And to be vulnerable, this may be one of the most difficult and things that it requires the most courage in our world. Because for many of us, especially if you're a teenager, you're probably a lot more vulnerable online than you are in person, right? And yet at the same time, online, we work so hard to create an image. And image management is a refined skill. And so to actually be a people who are vulnerable with our mistakes, with our sin, with our shortcomings, is beautifully different. We have the emotional and spiritual resources to do that when we're in the room of grace. That's what unity actually calls us to. Last one. I think we can move to forgive when we understand the idea of unity. Someone said to me, it was probably, I don't know when it was, maybe a month or so ago. They came to me and said, "Oh, Steve, thanks for the church service. That was great. It was so welcoming. I used to go to another church, but I was hurt, and so I'm so glad that I'm here." And I felt like saying, but I didn't. I felt like saying, let me tell you a secret. Give us some time, we'll hurt you too. Because the reality is we're sinners. And sometimes sinners hurt one another. But what I should have said to them was, here's the thing we do have. We do have communion at the end of every service. And we have the message of a cross and forgiveness. Forgiveness that tears down the walls between us and God and between us and others. Listen, you don't have to do what the world does when people hurt you. One of the changes that I've noticed in the past decade is the number of people who, if they get offended or if they don't appreciate something or they don't, or somebody hurts them or slights them, they actually, it's very common for the initial thing to do is to just move away. Defriend them, unfriend them, travel in different circles. Just step away. I talked to someone this week. They said, yeah, I was on the school board. I didn't like it, so I resigned. And then I was the church treasurer, but I didn't like the way things were going, and then I resigned. And then COVID came along, and I didn't like the way the church responded to there, and so I quit. And I couldn't help thinking to myself, at what point does unity matter? Jide prayed for wars this morning. Ukraine, Israel. And I started to think of all of the wars that occur around the world, but also around the world in families, and probably in the hearts and minds of us this morning. And I realized that there is only one way to stop the violence. There's only one way to stop the discord. And it's not regulations from a world body, and it's not smarter systems or even getting rid of the certain person at the top. I believe as followers of Jesus, we can stand up and say that only if somebody forgives is there going to be peace. And that's true in your marriage and family, and I think it's true worldwide. And as Christians, that's something we're called to do because we are forgiven people, called to forgive. So, let me ask you this. Is there unresolved conflict? Or as my friend Craig used to say, is there a disturbance in the force between you and somebody else in God's family? Maybe you're judgmental towards them. You could give me a long list of why you are critical. Or maybe you're in a relationship where there's hostility or coldness and you're cold. Maybe today you just need to stop and reflect on the fact that Jesus died so that there can be unity. That whatever resentment you might have for somebody in a church family, past or present, will not only damage that other person for you to stay hostile and against them, but it also damages the body of Christ. I'm so grateful for our elders because they are tenacious about praying and protecting the unity of our church family. Disunity in a church is like cancer. It threatens the beauty and it threatens the very life of the body of Christ. And so first of all, for people who are in God's family, if this is you today, I want to invite you, yes, challenge you, to do what you need to do to make this right. And just encourage you, as strongly as I can encourage you, to pray for it, to do something, to make a phone call, to set up an appointment, to go for coffee, to have someone over, sit around the table with them, write a note, do what you need to do, because unity matters. And for others of you, just let me encourage you to do this, that if you're at that point and God has convicted you that you need to make it right with somebody, the place to do it is in the room of grace, in the shadow of the cross. That's where you'll find the opportunity awaits. Well, whenever I talk about unity, I feel as if the evil one is trying to keep me from doing it. And so this past week, there were a few relationships that were in disunity that I became very aware of. This is the problem with preaching a sermon. And one of them was a man that I felt really hurt by, still do, by what took place. And so I'm trying to, I'm writing these sermons, thinking about all this stuff, and I feel convicted to phone him. I found out a few weeks ago that he's in palliative care. So that probably motivated me a little bit. And I couldn't find the strength to do it. For like 3 days, I was like, I know the number. I can't do it. I don't want to do it. It's very, very difficult to do. I don't want to do this. Until yesterday, I picked up the phone. And this would be a better story if it had a better ending. But I picked up the phone, and I said, God, you're going to have to give me strength to do this. Just say these words. So I pick up the phone, and the call goes through, and there's no answer. And I can't find his phone number. And so I called a couple other people. I'm waiting for some messages this morning. And I got to admit, I'm hoping that I don't find his phone number. Because unity is hard, and forgiveness is hard. And I just want to encourage you that it matters, that I'm on this journey with you, and it takes work. Paul says, maintain the unity that God has given, and that takes some work.